I got my first shot yesterday, and the little girl that stuck me, she said, Mr. Darty, she said, do you react to any medicines? And I said, no. And she said, so you don't react to anything? I said, I have a wife, so yes, ma'am, I do. And she said, she just died laughing. She said, I understand. She said, you better. All right, we got to tell a story before we get started. Steve's favorite part of the Wednesday night.
So far, the best one you've ever told was actually one you stole from your wife. Because I told it to 7 or 8 people, and I always get a good laugh out of it.
Did you run this one?
He's gonna be the first deacon we ever fire.
So if it's as good as Bill Hall, you go ahead.
He is cute though, isn't he? Old farmer out west had somebody pull up one day, and it was a man that got out and he said, I am from the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA. And he said, I have come to look over your farm. The old farmer said, okay. He said, I will go and I will search out all the corners of your farm and see if there's any problems. And the farmer said, okay, but if I was you, I wouldn't go in that field over there. Drug enforcement officer pulled out his badge. He said, you see this? And the farmer said, I see it. He said, that badge right there says I have the authority to go wherever I want to. You understand? He said, yes. He said, that badge tells me that I can go any place on this farm that I want to go. Do you understand? The old farmer said, yes. The old farmer went back to doing what he's doing. Drug Enforcement Administration officer was going around the farm, and all of a sudden the old farmer heard the drug enforcement officer just screaming, running across the field. And he saw the bull right behind him. And the old farmer went up to the fence and he said, show him your badge! Show him your badge! That rivals Bill Hall. That's the one worth repeating. Yeah, it is. Oh, man. Hebrews chapter 1 is where we are. I think why they cheered, Jay, a while ago for the meeting next Wednesday night is so I won't have to teach class. Oh, me. Hebrews chapter 1. We're going to be studying the book of Hebrews. We just finished the book of Mark. We're going to study the book of Hebrews. I do tend to move slow, a little slow maybe than some would like, but there's just so much in there. And this is a book that is, if it's not my favorite book of the Bible, it ranks up there real close. It's with John and a couple of others that are my favorites. And so I am pleased to teach this class. One of our sweet members that cannot come but listens asked if I would study the book of Hebrews. And so we're fulfilling a wish, or not a command or a demand, just a wish. And so hopefully we'll do that, and we'll do it to the very best of our ability. But the book of Hebrews has been called the riddle of the New Testament. And the riddle part of the book of Hebrews is the fact that we don't know who wrote it. We know that and believe that they were inspired. But through the years, a lot of folks have speculated who wrote this book. Was it written by Paul? Was it written by Apollos? Was it written by Silas? Was it written by Peter? Who was it written by? We don't know. And there's really no good authority out there that really, from the standpoint of writers of the time, that help us. And there's nothing in the book itself that helps us to tell exactly who the author is. I will say this, the Greek in it is so different than Paul's other writings. And I know for most people, they say, well, Paul wrote it. Well, if you want to believe that, that's fine. I will say that the Greek in it, for the most part, is so different than Paul's other epistles. It has led me to, in my personal study, to believe that Paul did not write it. But if he did, and if we find out in the hereafter that Paul was the penman of the book of Hebrews, we will rejoice and be glad. As we said, it's, I believe, inspired. And so therefore, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter if Paul wrote it, Peter wrote it, Apollos wrote it, or whoever wrote it. It is from God. And so for that, we're very thankful. It was written somewhere believed to be in the 60 to 69, probably 65 AD. So that would be, if that's true, that would be right before Paul died. Paul died probably around 68 or 69 AD. And so it would have been in Paul's time. It doesn't mention the temple, and it doesn't mention the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. Yet the author has a great understanding, as we'll see, not tonight, but we'll see later on, of the tabernacle. And we'll talk about why there's so many Old Testament references in a minute. But because it does not have mention of the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem in AD 70, most scholars believe then that it was probably written before that, somewhere in the 60s AD. So it is, time-wise, it is very contemporary to Paul's writings and to those times of the New Testament. It was written, and is interesting, the theory that was put forward by a man by the name of Barger in the 1700s, that if you look at it, it does hold up, but whether it's true or not, we don't know. If you look at the very beginning, God, who at various times in various ways spoke in times past by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by His Son. It doesn't begin as a typical epistle. It just starts out right in the meat. Some have said that this was probably a sermon. That the first 12 chapters, as we have it, were probably a sermon that was preached and then written down, or maybe written down and then preached. And then the 13th chapter was added, and altogether, all 13 chapters, as we have them, were then sent as an epistle. Could have been, might not have been. It does read interesting. It does, from the standpoint of it begins right at the heart of everything. It doesn't talk about how's everybody doing, how you feeling. It doesn't talk about who it's written to from a standpoint of whether it's a general epistle or a more specific epistle. It doesn't tell who it's from. You know, that they signed, remember, they signed usually at the beginning. The reason being because they used what? Scrolls, right? And in order to understand who it came from, they signed the letters at the beginning and not at the end. You know why? Think about it. Because you'd have to unroll this whole scroll to the end to find out who wrote you the letter. So they signed it at the beginning. There's none of that. The 13th chapter, though, seems to be several exhortations. They're added on, and they are tremendous, and they're wonderful, and they do admonish us so much and so well. And so, but when we get there, we'll look at all of those. But this is a great book, to say the least. Let's talk about the theme for just a minute from this book. And this is for me, when I'm studying a book of the Bible, I want to know what is the theme, what is the reason for writing it, and what is the point that is trying to be made by the inspired author. The point itself might be said in one word: better. Better. And as we look at it, this book, we'll see that he talks about in Christianity, we have a better messenger, a better apostle, a better priest, all basically revolving around Christ. Messenger, apostle, priest, what is that? map. Covenant. We have a better covenant. A better sacrifice. That gets you back to Christ. And a better way. And so the Hebrew writer spends time talking about, here's what we have. It's better. He's writing to folks that were probably Jewish in background, but converted to Christianity. Now, it's interesting when you stop and think about this, that when we look at the pages of the New Testament, we see two or three things that dominate most of the writings of the New Testament. We see Gnosticism being a problem. The idea that Gnostics were those that thought that they had an answer to everything and knew everything, and consequently, they really didn't. And then you had a problem with Judaism. Think about, what are some books that in their writings themselves in the New Testament are heavily leaning towards the Old Testament and showing that the Old Testament is not the way? What are some? Romans. What's another one? No, not really. That's more. How about Galatians? And the book of Hebrews. You find out in the book of Hebrews, if I were to ask you some questions about the Old Testament, probably what you'd say is, well, we don't study the Old Testament a lot, and I don't know a lot about the Old Testament. You find out when you study the book of Hebrews, you know more than you think you do. You may not know where they are and where it is in the Old Testament, but you find out that you do know more. There will be this constant repetition of the Old Testament. Matter of fact, in the first chapter, there are 7 allusions back to or quotes out of the Old Testament. And I have read it one time, and I didn't really go back to try to find it today. But I'm thinking, if my past studies bring forth a recollection of those past studies, there are over 100 references to the Old Testament in this little book. And so it's very heavy into the Old Testament. So that means that the writer was writing to a group of people that surely they knew what he was talking about. And so they were probably heavily steeped in Judaism. The book itself is written, as we said, with the idea of better, but it's showing that Christianity, Jesus Christ and Christianity, is far better than Judaism. Think about something with me for just a minute. I think it proves the point of why. And then we'll get into the text. I know you're saying, when are you going to get to the text? Well, we're fixing to get to the text. When you start something new, and you began for a little while, and all of a sudden the leader doesn't have, or is not there. The leader is not there. In this case, the leader's killed, Christ. And things aren't going your way. What do you want to do? Well, let's just go back and do it the old way, right? The way we used to do it. We were comfortable then. It was all right. We had problems, but we were able to get through them, and we just can't see our way through them. And we can't see really how this is advantageous to us. That, I believe, in a nutshell, answers why so many folks in Romans, in Galatians, in Hebrews, wanted to go back to the old way. And the Hebrew writer, that's what he's spending time doing. He's spending time saying, look, what we have as Christians is better. Better messenger, better apostle, better priest, better covenant, better sacrifice, better way. We have it better. And everything that's involved in Christianity is far better. And so, hang on. Don't give up. Don't stop. Keep living the Christian life. Persevere. It's all going to be all right, but just hold on. That's the whole idea when you study the book of Hebrews. That's the whole point. And when you get that point, everything else falls into place. Any questions, comments, suggestions, thoughts, hang-ups?
We're thinking that stuff that his wife told him was wrong on the way home.
Yeah. That's generally the way it works. Oh, I thought of 3 stories, but Steve said don't tell another story.
Well, I mean, you're fixing to.
So I'm going to quit right now. That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly.
Overall, your two were about
Yeah, something like that. But who's counting? Who's counting? Oh, man. Okay, well, let's begin. And let's at least get through the first 4 verses. That'll set us up for this study. Notice how he begins. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in times past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of majesty on high, having become so much better than the angels, as he had by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. There's a lot in there. There's a lot in there. Let's just kind of look at some of it and kind of dissect it. Notice verse 1. God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in past to the fathers by the prophets. God, since the beginning of man, has revealed himself. By nature, I don't mean by his nature, but by nature itself, by looking out in the world, God has revealed himself. I think, I'm not even going to say who, somebody led a prayer within the last week or two here, which I was in full agreement with. They were thanking God, but they were thinking that this changing of the seasons shows the power of God and how true that is. And I always think that, especially in spring, the kind of the rebirth of everything, so to speak, and the greening up of everything. And so God spoke. God speaks through nature. God speaks. But in this case, notice the Hebrew writer says God at various times and in various ways. What are some of the ways that God revealed himself, especially in the Old Testament? I'll give you one. The burning bush. How are some other ways? Cloud? Fire? Dreams? Balaam's donkey, yeah. Yeah. Do what? Direct? Yeah. Yeah. How did he speak to Job? Ooh, I stumped y'all. In a whirlwind. Spoke to Job in a whirlwind. Jeremiah talked about, I believe it's Jeremiah or Ezekiel, talked about the still small voice. Dreams, visions. Handwriting on the wall, Daniel 5 or 6? 5, I believe, Daniel 5. Yeah, Daniel 5. Handwriting on the wall. That's how God spoke. But notice that the Hebrew writer is going to change and say that God spoke in times past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son. Now I want to come back to verse 1 just a second, but I want to finish that little thought here. These last days. When's the last days? Christian age, 1 Timothy chapter 4. Yeah. Some would say, and I'll make reference to, some, if you read other books and you read other commentaries or things, you'll come across thoughts that you may not always agree with, and that's fine. Some will say that the last times that he's talking about here are the end of the days of the prophets. I don't think so. I think Paul in 1 Timothy 4 tells us that the latter days or the last days or the Christian age, Christian dispensation. We are in the last days. Now, how long are they going to last? Who knows? But it's the Christian era, the Christian time. There were basically three dispensations. What was the first? There you go. Patriarchal, Mosaical, and then Christian. And so those three. Now we're in the last one. But notice that he says he's spoken to the fathers by the prophets. The fathers probably, some have said this really, the latter days answers the Christian age because it talks about the fathers and then the prophets. The fathers, the patriarchal age, God spoke through the fathers to everyone else. The prophets. I want to come back to that because I want you to understand something that I know you know, but I'm just going to refresh your memory. A prophet is what? Really? Teacher, messenger, preacher. We often think of prophets as somebody that sees the future, but that's not really right. I mean, they do that. But literally, they're just a preacher. Now, in their preaching and in their teaching, might they see the future? Yes. But notice that he says God has spoken to the fathers by the prophets. But now we've got one that's better. But he's spoken to us through his Son. Now, what follows is several different characteristics of Jesus that are quite interesting. But we won't have time to delve into them too deeply, but let's look at them. Whom he has appointed heir of all things. First thing is that this Jesus owns everything. This Jesus that's better, number one, owns everything. Number two, through whom also he made the worlds. He created. He was there in the very beginning. He was the one in the book of Genesis where God uses that royal pronoun that says, let us make man in our own image. He's part of the us. He was there in John chapter 1. And it was through him, Colossians chapter 1, that that God the Father made the world. And so he created. Verse 3, who being in the brightness of his glory. In other words, the word his glory there is talking about the light of God. When you talk about the glory of God, you talk about the light of God. And so he says that he was in the very presence of God. He's saying that he existed before he ever came to this world. He pre-existed. And the express image of his person. I've seen a documentary on TV, but I've never been physically where I've seen the making of money. But if you have, you know that they have blanks. And then there's a machine that comes and stamps that image of Jefferson or Roosevelt or Washington upon the coins or Lincoln upon the coins. There's a idea here that when he talks about he's made in the image, he's talking about Jesus has been stamped upon or he's been put in the form of God and he has that within him. He is the image of God. And so he is, if you will, he is the exact image of God. And upholding, next, verse 3, upholding all things by the word of his power. He upholds all things. He is the providence worker. He cares. He maintains this world. He upholds. To uphold is that idea, to hold it up. He upholds all things with the word of his power. When he had by himself purged our sins. He purifies us. And he sat down. The idea really is not just sat down, but he is sitting down. I never really thought about that till today. I was reading something on this, and why there was such a point made of sitting down. And this author made a tremendously interesting point. The priests of the Old Testament times in the tabernacle were constantly up, fulfilling their duties. They never could, if you will, sit and relax or sit and enjoy or sit and do nothing. They were constantly sacrificing and constantly moving and doing. But Jesus sitting at the right hand, and we talked about that last week, a place of honor, a place of power, a place of authority. He's sitting at the right hand of the Majesty on high. He's being able to sit there because he's the one that, if you will, he is in charge. When I think of this, when I read it, I often think of, there's been a few times, not many, but a few times where I have been a speaker at a meal or at an event and have sat at the head table. And when I go, they treat you very nice. They talk about how wonderful you are because they don't know you, and they talk about how great a guy you are because they don't know you. And your wife sits there beside you and she's thinking, that's not so. and you get up and you say your spiel, whatever that is, but they've treated you royally. They've brought you your food. They've made sure that you had your food first, that you had your drink first, and they treat you royally. They show you the door, and they're so nice to you. And that's the image that I get. Jesus is sitting at the right hand. Everything's before him now. He's in charge. He's taking care of everything. But he's sitting at the right hand, Majesty on high. Having become so much better, 14 times in this short book, we're going to find that word better. But he's better than the angels. He's greater than the angels, as he has by inheritance obtained a more excellent name than they. Now we're going to find out in verses 5 through 14 that better name. Why is he better? What is better about him? What the Hebrew writer is doing in this first chapter is saying Christ is better than the angels. Well, big deal. We don't talk about angels much in the church. You know why? Don't understand them. That's exactly right. I don't talk about things I don't understand. No, we don't understand them, number one. And there's really not a lot given about, can we say, what are angels? Well, Nehemiah 9:6 tells us they're created beings. And we know that they are workers within the providence of God, and we know that they minister to us. But you know what the mystery is? Anybody? I mean, you can't be wrong. You can guess. We don't know how. And we don't see them. And so consequently, we don't know a lot about them. And there's not a lot just revealed about them in the Bible. I have preached sermons and taught classes on them. I set out back many years ago. I said, okay, I'm going to teach a class on angels. And about 6 weeks later, I said, I'm done. I'm cooked. I'm through with angels. And because there's just not a whole lot. But it is fascinating study. I've taught that class 2 or 3 different times. But notice what he says. He says Jesus is better than the angels. The angels also, evidently, the Jewish folks of that time had elevated angels to a higher status. So much so that they're basically saying we're going to listen to them. But also remember, what does the word angel mean? Angelos, messenger. Yeah. And so he says, this messenger, our messenger, Christ, is far better. if you stop and think about what the Hebrew writer has done in verses, especially verses 2 and 3, is that he has set up Jesus as the prophet, priest, and king. That he is the prophet, the priest, and the king that is to be listened to. No one else. Nothing else. God has spoken his message through him. He is the one that is over. He is the one sitting on the throne. He is the one that is over all things. All things have been given to him from the standpoint of authority. And he is the one that's in charge. He is better than anything that you will study from the standpoint of follow. And so that's what the Hebrew writer is trying to say. We need to listen to Jesus because he's better than anything that you can bring up against him. That's a tremendous thought. It's still a relevant thought for us today. And as we bring this lesson kind of full circle into a close, we ask one question. Why is that still relevant today? Why is Jesus the one we should listen to? Remember the Godhead? What was said on the Mount of Transfiguration? Hear him. Listen to him. Hear him. Listen to him. What did John write in 2 John 9? Whoever transgresses and abides not in the doctrine. What's the word doctrine mean? The teaching. The doctrine of Christ. The teaching belonging to Christ. We're under the Christian dispensation. We're to listen to Christ. And so if the world asks us, here's something I was thinking about. Within not even 5 minutes, but within 5 minutes of this building, there are, that I could think of just off the top of my head, because I don't know the surrounding area as well as I wished I did. But there are two places of worship within 5 minutes of this building that are not Christian in belief. There may be more. Are there more, Steve? There's two that I can think of. Right? Yeah, that's the two I was thinking about. Okay, that's what I was thinking. So we have not just those that don't believe the way we believe, but we also have a world. And talk to the 20-year-old and the 30-year-old. And it's amazing what they believe and what they don't believe. But we have to ask them, why don't you listen to Christ? And here's our answer. This is why we do listen to Christ. And so Hebrews chapter 1, especially verses 2 and 3, are as much, if not more relevant today than they ever were. Anything else? That's a great place to end. Yeah. Uh-huh.
They were talking about that people that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of them probably said that some of them believed that there wasn't going to be necessarily Christ, but that it was going to be Archangel, Michael. And if you read in Revelation, it talks about him defeating the dragon. Some people believe that it was not going to be necessarily Jesus, but it might be somebody else. And so even, some of the Romans talked about some of those things as well. And so maybe what he's talking about here is, hey, we need to get our mind right. Yeah. It is Jesus. He is the one.
That's right.
And we're going to talk about that some more, about how he is superior to the angels to try to put that belief away. Maybe.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's true or not, but
Yeah. No.
see some stuff about that.
Yes.
somewhere.
Yes. That was the first finding of scripture from that area in 60 years that they found. And the whole reason they found it is because folks had begun again to loot that area. And it holds so much for us as Christians. Anything else? All right. Well, next week is the family meeting. We hope that you'll be here for that. I was told that I could speak for 20 minutes, and then they said, no, you can only speak for 5. So, yeah, I noticed that. When I sat down after you said that, I thought, man, I got a devotional and another topic, and I got 5 minutes. No, it won't take us long. But anyway, that's next week, and so we hope that you'll come for that and be a part of that. I believe that the congregation needs to be informed, and as leaders, as part of the leadership team, I'm not an elder, but as part of the leadership team, we need your feedback. And really, like I said, I did have my evaluation while ago, because I've been here a year, and in talking to the elders, there's so many thoughts that we want to get started, but it's hard to set them down now because you don't know the time frame that you can set them down on. And so this doesn't mean that plans aren't being made, and some of them will be revealed, probably not next week, but coming soon. And they may have to be changed, but that's all right. If nothing else, we have learned within this time frame to be adaptable, right? And somebody that is rigid, right, dear? You would say that, but you'd shake your head about that with regards to me, right? With somebody that's very rigid, it's very difficult, but I'm learning. We thank y'all. We love y'all, and we appreciate you. All right, let's leave those.